Welcome back to another episode of Rednecks Rising Podcast, your favorite anti-capitalist, anti-fascist, anti-racist Appalachian podcast. My name's Chelsea, and I'm your host, and I know that it's been a couple of weeks since I've posted an episode on this platform, but I haven't been totally MIA. Hopefully you didn't miss the memo and you boot scoot and boogied yourself right over to Dixieland of the Proletariats podcast to listen to my Mother Jones deep dive with them. If you didn't, not to fear, because you will find that episode has now been uploaded onto this podcast platform. How very, very convenient. Now, this episode is dropping on a Monday, which is not usually when our episodes drop. And therefore, this episode today is a bonus episode. Now, if you've been paying attention on social media, you might have heard me talking about sitting down for this interview today. And in this here second ever bonus episode for our beloved podcast, I sit down with Matt, an Amazon warehouse worker based out of Campbellsville, Kentucky. Or at least he was an Amazon warehouse worker until he got fired for trying to unionize his coworkers for the atrocious conditions that they face in one of the first warehouses that good old Bezos established in the late 90s. Matt reminds us about how NAFTA sent the good jobs that used to exist in Campbellsville overseas, where corporations could exploit cheaper labor. And when that happened, it left empty warehouses to be grabbed up by Bezos's greedy, grubby little fingers. And then Matt talks about how he actually used to think that unions weren't worthwhile until working for Amazon and experiencing that whole pandemic thing, which altogether converted him into a self-proclaimed communist and, of course, as we know, a union organizer. Matt goes on to describe conditions and policies that paint a morbid, dystopian picture of the reality around Amazon's mission to turn America into one giant company town. From establishing, quote, affordable housing, end quote, for their workers to just be evicted from as soon as they no longer work for the company, to offering Amazon Care health options, and even being cleared to potentially govern their own town at some point, not to mention their malicious data ownership, surveillance, and security, all centered around controlling their workers and consumers. But I am getting ahead of myself. Before we jump into today's bonus episode, I'm not going to have any housekeeping because that is for tomorrow's regularly scheduled episode. But what I do have for you is a trivia question from the one, the only, Christopher.
Hey, Chelsea.
Hey, Chris.
So this week, I probably have an easy one for most of you. The Appalachian Trail runs over 2,200 miles through the Appalachian Mountains. The ending point is in Georgia. Our question this week, what state is the starting point in?
Oh, easy peasy, but I won't ruin it for the listeners. That brings us to today's episode, so let's jump right into it, y'all. Already exhausting as well, having to worry about covering your own ass.
Well, and what I have to say is the only reason I want my job back at Amazon is to organize.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because there's nothing good about that place. Nothing. Yeah. Except, it's a little bit better than factory work.
Yeah. You were in distribution?
Yeah, in the fulfillment center. So Amazon has this classification. If you're a fulfillment center worker, it is technically a warehouse, but they'll use some government loopholes to categorize it as retail. Because a lot of everything that is going out of the building, it will go to the customer, but then a lot of it will go from one fulfillment center to another. And a warehouse is classified as a building that ships to storefronts. We're doing the exact same type of work, yet we are classified differently, and thus they will pay us less because of that.
Oh, so retail workers get paid less under like the pay structure than warehouse workers would be paid.
Absolutely.
That's so interesting. Okay. So I'm going to already have questions, but before we dig into like all of that good stuff, why don't we start as if like imagine the listener out there doesn't have any idea who you are or what's going on with Amazon. Can you give us like a little 101 intro?
Yeah, so hi everybody. My name is Matt Luttrell, and I've been an Amazon employee for a year and 6 months until I was terminated 2 weeks ago on a Friday. And, that was like 5 minutes into my shift or something. They really had it out for me. But yeah, Amazon in Campbellsville has existed since 1999. It was one of the first warehouses. And that means that Jeff Bezos and his wife, they were here. People who've been here since the doors opened, they remember the executives being here. They remember how Jeff Bezos named a lot of the parts of the building after his nieces and nephews. And yeah, it comes in a desperate situation for the people of Campbellsville because this is essentially and has always been a company town. It's just that Amazon took advantage of the last major employer leaving the town. It was Fruit of the Loom. Fruit of the Loom was here for generations. They started in Campbellsville, and people made a middle class income. 4,200 people made a middle class income up until NAFTA. And then when NAFTA happened, they decided to outsource, move all their production to Central America, and left the people who had spent and invested generations of lives high and dry. Left them high and dry, and it's unfortunate. A couple years later, Jeff Bezos was scouting out some places where he could get cheap labor and subject the people to very awful working conditions. And the city of Campbellsville in the state of Kentucky was offering incentives, huge incentives to come here. So they handed that old warehouse to Amazon, which it wasn't exactly an old warehouse. It was kind of modern for the time. But they handed that to them, gave them a bunch of tax incentives. They set up here and started paying people minimum wage.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I'm not surprised by this story at all. I live in Western North Carolina where it's the old, like, uh, we had steel manufacturing plants out here, and some other textile mills out here. We still have paper plants to this day. And like where the old Daco plant used to sit, which was like produce like machine parts from what I understand, there's literally a Walmart now. And that's like one of the biggest employers. So similar situation, just instead of Jeff Bezos, it's the Walton family.
Oh, the Waltons. In many ways, they're worse than Bezos, right?
But same situation. It's like they employ so many people, they pay minimum wage, no benefits, and they're situated exactly where one of the former largest industrial centers was that would employ tons of people at decent wages with benefits. Usually they were unionized. And this is something, if you get the chance ever to listen to episode 2 with Zoo, she talks about how infuriating it is when people talk about like Appalachians in particular voting against their own best interest. And it's like, well, actually, if you look at some of what the Democrats have done, it hasn't been in Appalachians' best interest. If we want to just like put it like boil it down to something that's that simple, it's like look at NAFTA, which is exactly what you named and exactly what caused a lot of our big industrial employers to leave this area. And it just left us high and dry to be sold off to people like Bezos and Walton.
Yeah, and I mean, that was the Clintons who did that.
Exactly. So
And
oh,
around,
go ahead. Sorry.
I mean, Joe Biden was also a part of that, and so was he on the tough on crime bill that happened around the same time.
Yep, exactly. Which also, I'm trying to interview one of my neighbors here who was impacted by that. He's a Black Appalachian man who was incarcerated as a result of the tough on crime approach. So all of this happening under neoliberal but blue neoliberal leadership.
Oh yeah, it's blue MAGA.
Yeah, exactly. So, I would imagine then, well, I know a lot of Kentucky's history is deeply rooted in labor organizing. Is that history what sparked you to want to organize your workplace?
Well, it's a combination of things. I always knew about the history, but I still bought into the capitalist narrative for quite a while. That like unions weren't really relevant these days, and Amazon changed my mind on that. And like right now, I'm a fucking communist. So yeah, they changed my mind to a very big degree. The pandemic honestly changed my mind on all of that as well. Seeing that, the capitalists did not step up to help everybody like all these narratives were pushing, right? The capitalists didn't step up and do charity to replace welfare and all that stuff that people like to delude themselves with. And so I learned about the history, but I also saw what was going on at Amazon facilities, what was going on with all of the union activity just coming seemingly out of nowhere. So I had to investigate that. I had to research that. I had to see that the Alabama elections were starting to go on, but then I digged even deeper and I found out that Amazonians United, which is a militant group that has been making demands of Amazon in a wildcat way, without being hosted by a union, has been around quite a bit longer than Amazon Labor Union or the movement to organize in Alabama. And so this stuff inspired me because it had me digging more into Amazon and what Amazon was doing to people. Amazon lets people die all the time. You know, we heard about that one worker dying in New Jersey, but there's actually been three more. Um, we heard about people dying in Minnesota. The Amazon let those people die in the tornadoes. You know, they they're not as progressive as they try to make themselves seem. They're literally not progressive at all. They progress your time from lifespan to the grave. You know, they just make it happen a lot faster. They accelerate it, put a jump start on it, and so I started to realize that hey, management is not going to change anything here. They have no incentive to. They just look at their numbers all day. They're fed their information by an algorithm, and they pick and choose their favorites. Those are the people that they pay some lip service to, and not the good kind. But it's horrifying to think about. You know, the underlying inhumanity that I had to see before I started all this.
Mm. Is there anything that you feel comfortable sharing that you witnessed?
Yeah, so soon after I volunteered for the Gimba position, you can see the blue vest I'm wearing. That's a Gimba vest. It's basically, your job to do that. You'll take an hour out of your night and you'll go around and survey associates to get their feedback and talk to them about their issues. You don't really like take any names or anything like that. You just take account of the issues, how many people have them, and such. And then you go to your manager, you tell them what the issues are, and they're supposed to try and make an action plan or tell you something to tell the worker if that is a knowledge barrier and such. And so it's all about supposedly trying to improve the process and all that. But Amazon management is very apathetic towards that. So if you go there and management makes their action plans, you make your presentation in front of all the managers, and they'll say, okay, we're going to start working on this. Well, then the deadline passes, and you start reminding them, hey, you were supposed to start working on this a while ago. Why isn't it fixed yet? And they just basically speak out of both sides of their mouth. They will say, oh, it's not really a big deal, and all that jazz. Just completely apathetic. So there was a time that I was in a mod that's sort of an area that you get assigned to, and there was this older lady who I stumbled upon, and she had pulled her hip out of place trying to open a bin that was just completely overstuffed. You can see the bins behind me, so when those get filled up with too many items, they become very hard to open. They become it becomes very hard to find your items within there. It becomes a workplace hazard.
Yeah, I imagine they
So-
could even like fall on you if it's like overstuffed on one of those like above your head.
Yeah, there was an OSHA complaint back in April that OSHA got into looking into like 3 months later, but it was that somebody like pulled a whole row of those bins
Oh my gosh.
out.
And those are those like solid wood?
They are cardboard, but
Oh,
they're
okay.
still heavy.
Yeah, but they're filled with who knows what that could be super heavy.
Oh, absolutely. So, there's times when it's supposed to be all apparel, or there's times where it's supposed to be all non-apparel items like electronics, glasses, such. And yeah, it's bad. But those cardboard bins you see behind me, those are just full of apparel. That's what those are supposed to be for. And even when those get overfilled, apparel can do a number on cardboard, trying to force it open,
Mm.
But it will do a number to your wrists. It'll do a number to your muscles, trying to open those for 10 hours a day,
Mm-hmm.
trying to fight with those. And management's response to that lady pulling her hip was not to let her go home early, but they just took her to AmCare, which is supposed to be on-site medical, which they don't really do much. They might give you an ice pack and tell you to go back to work or let you sit down for a few minutes. So they just started the workers' compensation process with her. And then she had to go and have hip surgery. And she was out for like 6 to 8 months, something like that. It was horrible. And the manager that, witnessed her doing this after she called for the manager, all he did was do the incident report that he's supposed to do, and he replaced the single bin that happened on, not all of them. So despite all of the injuries that occur because of these hazards that are directly caused by management, they still do not address the problem. They don't even fix it, right? It still continues to this day. And despite me and other people on the safety teams constantly giving management this feedback, we even would go as far as to write down the specific bins and make a list of them that they were supposed to give to the what they call the bin meister. It is somebody on day shift who is in charge of all of the numbers and all of what goes in where and all of maintaining those bins. It would still not get fixed, and they know exactly why it happens. It happens because when the inventory stowers, the people who fill up the bins, they are left in the same area for quite a long time. So those bins start to get full, right? But they have no choice but to keep putting items in there to make their rates, to make their productivity. So they are forced to do something that is going to cause somebody else to possibly get injured or to have a hard time finding their item simply because management refuses to move them somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. And when you're talking about AmCare, I'm like, this is just literally a company town. They send you to their company healthcare before you could even go see an actual doctor.
And they encourage you not to go and report that to OSHA or anything like that. Um, so if AmCare does end up doing an incident report about the injury or whatever, that means you're going to go to workers' comp and then get put on um, light duty. And you're going to go through their insurance for workers' comp. That is Sedgwick. That is the same notoriously bad workers' compensation insurance that Walmart has, that a lot of these employers use. And then one of the issues with workers' comp is that they're going to send you to somebody that doesn't necessarily need to be a doctor because they're hired by the insurance company, not by a hospital, not by a practicing clinic. And for our town, that looks like, a little workers' compensation medical care. So you go there, and their goal is not really to treat the injury, it is to get you back to work as fast as possible.
And for as minimal cost as possible.
Oh, absolutely. They are constantly trying to lower their workers' compensation costs. And my wife, for example, she injured her wrists on these bends, her hands and her wrists. She could have arthritis, she could have tendonitis, or she could have carpal tunnel. But they didn't want to take her to get tested for that. They just wanted her to buy wrist braces and arthritis medication out of pocket. Not even like medical grade, because you can't really exactly get that on Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
So they wanted her to buy this stuff out of pocket, and then they said, "Oh, well, you can still move your wrists, you can still move your hands, so we're gonna take you off of light duty, and you're gonna start working again, the same job that hurt you.
You can still breathe. You can still work."
Right? Yeah. Put ice on it. Rub some biofreeze on it. Right.
Oh my gosh.
Biofreeze is like icy hot.
And it's what I'm realizing is that as you're talking about the deep interconnection of like the for-profit healthcare, health insurance industry and healthcare industry, and then the way that they work with these corporate entities, like the goal is actually to turn the United States into a giant company town. Like that is the goal.
Oh, absolutely. And you see that happening with Amazon around the country. So housing prices have gotten so ridiculous, rents have gotten so ridiculous that now Amazon opened up affordable housing programs. So
no, that's not real, right?
If you work there in certain cities, like even Nashville or Austin, or they're trying to do this in Nevada, but basically, they'll give you a place to stay while you work there. And, pretty much as soon as you get fired, you're evicted, right?
Oh my gosh.
Nevada has cleared them to open up a company town. And
how is this legal?
To actually govern their own company town with minimal oversight.
Matt, there's no way this is real.
No, it's real. It's happening.
Oh, I mean, I knew about a lot of scandalous shit, but the fact that they have given them governing authority, I don't even know. I'm honestly a little speechless.
Yeah. So in Amazon, they have a very perverse reward system as well. So instead of giving out stock and giving out VCP, which was variable compensation plan, which would be like if your warehouse's performance is very good, then everybody will get like a $250 bonus at the end of the month or something. They used to have that before 2018 when they decided to um, boost the minimum wage to $15 an hour because of some criticism that they were receiving from Bernie Sanders and a bunch of other so-called progressives. When they gave that out, they took away the stock. They took away everything that people had earned. And at our site, because it's so old and because it's a small town, you have people who have been there since the doors opened. They had a lot of stock in 2018, right? It was, I think their stock at the time was worth about $200 back in 2018, and 200 or maybe about 800. I'm not exactly sure, but if those people would have been allowed to hold on to their stock today, they'd be retired. you know,
Mm-hmm.
but Amazon just completely done away with the restricted stock units program that they had back then. So you either sold it or they took it back and gave it to the corporate.
So they exchanged real wealth for instant income, essentially.
Yeah, instant income. That's they took away your VCP bonuses. They took away all
An
that other
instant income that actually declined in value because now our fucking cost of living is outrageous.
Oh, absolutely. And these people that they took these things away from, they were such a big part of Amazon's development. Being early into the industry, right? And so they built Amazon from the ground up essentially on their blood, sweat, and tears, and working conditions that are way worse than they are now, right? Back then, they didn't even have fans. They didn't have HVAC. They didn't have the water coolers. They had to strap on harnesses to do certain things. It was a dangerous environment. And they used to do like, heavier stuff, mostly non-apparel items. And nowadays, those people watched it go from a very important part of Amazon's operations to Amazon not investing anything into this warehouse further. So they installed HVAC and fans and water coolers very sparsely throughout the facility. So you still have areas that don't have fans or water coolers. You still have areas that the HVAC doesn't even work right. And that's intentional because Seattle controls your temperatures. Headquarters sets the temperature range that warehouses can be in. Obviously, so they can save on their energy bill, right? And then you'll have stuff like the HVAC's air compressor goes out, and then it becomes sweltering inside of the area that is supposed to be cooled by the HVAC. Or they'll fucking have the HVAC on, and then they'll have the shipping dock doors open. So like all of the cold air will just go out the fucking doors, right? Stupid shit like that. And so imagine being a picker. So you're the person in this manual labor facility that doesn't have robotics. So you're walking 20 miles a night, upstairs, downstairs, on the concrete, just everywhere. Whenever they need to move you, you move. Whenever the robot decides you have to go somewhere else, you go. That means you could go up to the 4th floor, you could pick one item, and then have to go all the way back to the 1st floor, or have to go to a completely different building. So you can walk more than 20 miles a night. I think the longest I've walked, and I had these Under Armour shoes at the time. They had a little chip in them that basically did the same thing as your phone can do, where it tells you how many miles you walked or whatever. But it's more accurate because it's inside of your shoe. So it said I walked 25 miles in one night, and that's like the most I did. And that's a 10-hour shift of doing that.
And
and
doing that like every day of the week.
plus dealing with the hazards and the heat.
I mean, you could I think about some of like the heat waves that we just had earlier this summer, and you could legitimately have a heat stroke.
Yes, absolutely. And people here, on top of all the other things they've been begging for, because if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu, you have to beg for scraps if you can't negotiate. One of the things they've been begging for over the summer is an extended break due to the heat, because heat exhaustion is severe. And Amazon speaks outside of out both sides of their mouths, the Orwellian doublespeak kind of shit. And what they do is they tell you it doesn't get above 75 degrees in the warehouse. Even during the heat wave, they say it doesn't get above 75 degrees.
It gets hotter than that in my single wide trailer.
Right, exactly. I mean, trailers are a tin can in the first place, right?
But, exactly, and a warehouse is a giant tin can.
Yeah, it is. Especially this place. It's the roof is made out of aluminum, for God's sakes.
Exactly.
And it's dystopian. And then enough people will complain, and then management will say, "Oh well, yeah, it got to 78 degrees." And basically, they have safety come around and measure with their own thermometer. It's not a transparent process. They'll come around with their own thermometer, get up next to the vents, and then measure the temperature next to the vents, instead of inside the aisles that people have to pick in. Obviously, in between the aisles, there's no airflow there. If you have vents that are far away, it's not going to penetrate through the aisles,
Especially if the boxes are overpacked. So what little airflow there could be, it's not going to be there.
Yeah, so people are suffocating, and especially the older people. Now imagine, I told you what a picking is like, but stowers, they have to stay in that aisle. They don't get a chance to get in front of a fan. They don't have a chance to go and stand in front of the HVAC if they want to get cooled off. They have to sit in that sweltering aisle and stow. They have to make a rate, right? They have to make that rate without getting quality errors, which is very hard if you are disoriented by the heat. And it's so sad. And part of the union organizing, the militancy, the rank and file, shop floor stuff, you have people bring in their own thermometers to tell management what the temperature is, and to be very confrontational with management about this. And so people recorded their own temperatures as high as 85 degrees inside those aisles, as high as 100 degrees on the fourth floor, because heat rises and it stays there. And Christ, management doesn't even care. People use their own time just to get out of there so they don't pass out and have to go to the emergency room later on.
So, okay, so is this what is it, the Campbellsville Center? It is unionized then?
No, so we're just still in the process of doing that. Since this December is when we first got involved with an actual union. So before that, it was basically me and some others just going around on the shop floor, building that community, forming our common demands and such, building up our organizing committee. And in December, we got in touch with the Machinists and Aerospace Workers Union. And, they were really interested in our campaign. So the organizers from headquarters were helping us out, and helped us build our organizing committee. And after the victory of Staten Island, Amazon started their retaliation. So, they started targeting me with write-ups. They started, not recognizing the fact that the hazardous condition caused me to have this issue. And once you're on their radar as an Amazon employee, they just continue to target you with write-ups. They continue to scrutinize your work harder than anybody else.
Mm-hmm. That's almost exactly what happened to me. And I was working in like a nonprofit setting, so it's a little bit different, but it was the same. They just use like performance as the tactic to go after, even when it was totally irrelevant or not even based in facts.
Oh, absolutely. And Amazon can make up all of the data they want to. Amazon is a data science company first. AWS is their profit drive, the Amazon Web Services, that does all these business to business services. I mean, hell, they even have cryptocurrency that you can go and make and manage on Amazon, right? Through their web services. They have so many of these metrics. I mean, the Washington Post uses Amazon Web Services for their platform, and so they can use all this cloud computing. And all of the metrics they use to track employees are formulated by data scientists, right? And are designed and ran through this web services platform. So they have every incentive not to make anything transparent. They have every incentive. You know, they could be using facial recognition technology in their warehouses for all we know, right? And my point here is that in this hierarchy, they control the numbers, and we don't. We don't even know the methodology they use to collect this information.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, in response to, in addition to the collective bargaining agreements, we also need experts to help us formulate a digital bill of rights for Amazon associates, Amazon workers.
Tell us more about that.
So a digital bill of rights obviously should mean that Amazon, they cannot tie your customer data to your employee data and your healthcare data. It would include that they cannot put, facial recognition technology in the warehouse. We need to make rules against that, and we also need to legally bind them to those rules. And that would include that they should step down on their surveillance. Theft at Amazon facilities does not happen as often as people try to say it does. Right? Amazon employees, they hardly steal, and if they are stealing, why doesn't Amazon address the underlying cause of that, which is extreme poverty in most cases?
Mm-hmm.
And instead of beefing up their security presence and making sure that employees do not trust them and giving employees the impression that they are not trusted. Because security at Amazon, they only exist to shake you down on your way out. They have metal detectors on the way out, but not at the entrance. So they're not there to protect you. They are there just to make sure you're not stealing. They are there just to make sure you're not doing union activities. There was a security guard shortly after the election victory at JFK 8. He told me that they have to be checking the bathrooms every 45 minutes to make sure that there's no union materials being left there. They have to check the break room. They have to check the floors. So basically, they said that they know that they cannot remove it, but they will investigate it.
And then they can use their facial recognition software to be like, who has been walking to the bathroom recently.
Even if they don't have the facial recognition technology, they're going to know who you are.
Yeah.
And like their cameras, they can see everything. So if you're passing out authorization cards in the break room, or union literature in the break room, or union literature on the shop floor, or getting a card signed, or using your phone to trade phone numbers with somebody you want to be in contact with, they know exactly what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then they can target people based on that. They'll check the cameras to see, like, you say you took a bathroom break at this time, and then they'll look at that time and look at what time you were out of the bathroom, by seeing like when you went, you know.
It truly is dystopian. It's just like complete ownership over your lives and your activities in work and outside of work.
Amazon reminds me of school. It reminds me of when I lived in an inner city school, and I went to that kind of school. So there were security guards everywhere, cameras everywhere. You had to be monitored at all times, and this is exactly what Amazon is. It's a prison for employees. You're in prison for 10 hours until you go home.
Working class prison. Yeah.
Everything you do is surveilled. Like, why the hell would they need a shit ton of cameras in the break room, for God's sakes, that can see what you're doing on your phone if they just zoom in a little bit?
Yeah, I don't like that.
And despite Amazon, on our first Amazon national call, we had 150 Amazon employees on a Zoom call. We had Heather Goodall from the Albany campaign and Reverend Ryan Brown as speakers. I also spoke towards the end to validate how people were feeling and such. And I took some PTO, and I did this meeting in the break room. Not like I was pretty much alone during that time, but like, I was just like, fuck it. I don't care about the goddamn cameras. They already know what I'm doing. They've already been targeting me, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that. And that was a week before I was fired.
Yeah. That was pushing it. But that was just like pulling out the red flag for the bull, come and get me. Oh my gosh. So I'm so curious because I'm in the process of learning so much about labor history. It's not something that I was exposed to until I became a community organizer. And I just dropped an episode all about like the history of Labor Day and how it was basically used to co-opt International Workers' Day. And so much has happened since then to just further suppress efforts to organize. And, Labor Day is now basically just like a giant excuse to spend more money at these corporations. And so I over the last year, seeing this massive increase in union interest and union engagement is so interesting. And I think for me, I'm observing that part of it is out of like necessity. Like, what do we have left to lose? We're all fucking barely hanging on anyways. And I'm curious from your end, having worked at Amazon over the last year and a half and kind of been a part of this rise in the wave of labor organizing. What's your take on like the trigger behind this and why folks are stepping into this more now, even though the sort of like narrative culture of the oligarchs around union organizing hasn't changed?
So my sort of analysis is that things just completely fucking crumbled for most working class people during the pandemic. So people started suffering a lot more. They figured out that employers all across the spectrum do not give a fuck about them. People who were laid off at the beginning of the pandemic, or even, some people that are still laid off now. People that just became jobless, got fired. People that were forced to take more than one job. And this has accelerated that. Look at the environments that happened when unions came to prominence. What was there? There was a lot of suffering.
Mm-hmm. The Great Depression is like when Haymarket Square, or the Depression of the 1890s, 93, was like when the Haymarket Square massacre happened.
Absolutely. And suffering is the catalyst for every type of revolution that happens. So, I mean, look at the French Revolution. Everybody was fucking starving, right?
Mm-hmm.
Look at the general strikes way back during the Greek times and the Roman times when they would have like plebiscites. So, the politicians would be all fucked up, so everybody would just leave the city and have a general strike that way. Or the Greeks had a shitload of general strikes that people don't really know about. And every revolution had that catalyst. They had the suffering environments, and this is the start of something big here. So, if capitalists are playing a fine game of fuck around and find out,
Yes.
and I went through some of this suffering during the pandemic. So, whenever COVID came to the United States, which was around March 2020, that's when everybody started laying people off. And then I was one of the first to get laid off too, because I worked for a manufacturer for Toyota, made the parts for Toyota. And since I was making exclusively Toyota parts, when Toyota decided to shut down their factory in Georgetown, Kentucky, we were out of a job until late June of 2020. And during that time, all of the infrastructure was being challenged, especially the unemployment infrastructure. So even though the federal government was subsidizing unemployment and all that, people in the state of Kentucky were not getting their unemployment because it was overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
It was not built to handle that influx. And so while that was going down, I didn't get unemployment until July. So I was struggling, you know.
How did you survive that period?
Luckily I was living with a parent, but this parent was also laid off because we worked at the same factory. So yeah, it was rough. My mother did not get unemployment either. You know, she actually still hasn't to this day got it, and it's awful.
Same thing happened in North Carolina. Just the infrastructure was not adequately prepared, and a lot of people went without for a long time. And we already go ahead.
And so the other thing I want to get at, where I started suffering even more, is so I went back to this employer whenever they called me back, and immediately after they started working us 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and 8 hours on Sunday. At least the 8 hours on Sunday was double time, though. But it was this way. We also got paid bi-weekly, and it was awful. So you're working that much after they just laid you off for months. So they wanted to spit in your face by laying you off, and then they wanted to work you as hard as they could and squeeze as much out of you as soon as you come back. And you're in hot conditions because in a rubber factory, that rubber has to be, baked. It has to be heated. And so, those horrendous conditions for that long. But there's one thing that was good about that job that I miss. It's that I knew that if I made my production goals, and if I did that, then I wouldn't be fired. They wouldn't get rid of me. I had some job security with that. I knew that if I showed up on time, I would be all right. If I didn't accumulate too many points, I would be all right. It was a Toyota manufacturer. You had 14 paid holidays. you had a shit ton of vacation time because Toyota has good benefits. And so do Toyota subsidiaries. And so I knew that if my machines broke down or if I had some kind of problem, I would, if I had a medical issue, they would send me to a real nurse.
Mm.
And that nurse could help me to some degree. Not just tell me to put ice on it and get back to work. And I knew that if my machines went down and maintenance had to work on them, all of my downtime did not count against me. Because it wasn't my fault.
Mm-hmm.
But at Amazon, you don't get that excuse.
How'd you end up shifting from Toyota to Amazon?
So as I said, it wasn't Toyota directly, but it was a subsidiary. But switching from there to Amazon, I thought Amazon would be a great place to work, considering I had worked from the end of June until Christmas, 12 hours a day all the time. So I knew that Amazon couldn't do that to me because they limit your working hours to 60 hours maximum a week. Right? And at first, I really did like Amazon. And then that was until I started to learn that Amazon is worse than the company I came from. I mean, so I started out as a temporary worker at Amazon, a seasonal worker. And I saw other people getting hired full-time straight out the gate. For example, my wife was one of them. She got hired in November of 2020 at Amazon, and she was full-time straight out the gate. But I got hired at Amazon in February 2021 as a seasonal worker. Like, why the hell would I do this? Why would I'm looking for full-time work? Why would Amazon just not give me full-time work? They're giving everybody else full-time work. Everybody else gets immediate access to all of the good benefits. Which good for the area I am in. I should provide that context there. Mm-hmm. Seasonal workers don't get jack shit in terms of benefits compared to the full-time workers. They get the same base pay and access to the same differentials and whatever, but not all of them. So Amazon had a company that they staffed with. It was called Integrity Staffing. And they were in a class action lawsuit, one of many, but this one was for wage theft and for theft of benefits from these workers. This was going on while I was one of those seasonal workers, and I found out about it. And I was checking my pay stubs every week to make sure nothing was missing. Mm-hmm. And I'm thankful that nothing was missing from my check, but, I figured out that a lot of these people who might have had something missing from their check, they were never notified of this $60 million settlement. That forced Amazon to get rid of that staffing agency. And that's one of the things we're fighting for to this day, is that seasonals, they work 40 hours a week. They deserve the exact same benefits. They are our equals. They should be considered for upward mobility to the same degree that we are, which is very little, I might add.
Yeah. And the other demands, so actually that's a great point. So you're still fighting for recognition for the union at this particular center. What are some of the demands that are coming to the surface from those who are organizing around the union?
So I would definitely caveat that, this isn't New York. We don't have a high cost of living like they do. But particularly, as you and I both know, rural people are very, very vulnerable to cost of living increases
Mm-hmm.
because, typically they might have to drive very far to get to work. So when gas goes up, people are not going to be able to afford to get to work.
We don't have competing grocery stores. I had a friend who was visiting from the capital area of North Carolina, and she went to one of the grocery stores when I was living in like the Swain County, North Carolina area. And she was like, this is so much more expensive than in the capital. And I was like, yeah, it's because y'all have a corner store everywhere you turn, and we have 2 grocery stores for an entire county.
Oh, absolutely. And, look at Campbellsville. We have Walmart and we have Kroger and then we have, dollar stores in between.
Mm-hmm,
Like
exactly.
Dollar General everywhere, right? And it's horrible. It really is. And then everything else is fast food. Um that's one of the things you have to say about Amazon is when you're in a company town, you're not going to get the freshest groceries. The only things that will be able to compete are the fast food chains.
Yep.
So you have Amazon workers that are working for wages that aren't worth anything anymore, and then you have to go and buy fast food all the time because they don't have time to cook.
Mm-hmm.
Because they don't have the energy to cook. They're exhausted all the time. And Amazon recently, one of the issues has been since the inflation, Amazon has not given a single cost of living raise. But these factories around us, they have started giving cost of living raises.
Mm-hmm.
Proportionately. So on time. So like whenever inflation happens, they adjust their wages right then and there. But Amazon does not. Amazon is very bureaucratic in their raise system. Every year, unless you have a walkout or something like that, unless you actually demand it, Amazon will do a wage survey in September, the third quarter of the year. So they will look at what everybody around them is paying. They don't look at your cost of living. They just look at the competition. They look at Bureau of Labor Statistics data. And then they decide whether you deserve a raise based on that data. You don't get any input.
So is that one of the demands y'all are organizing around, is a change to that structure?
Oh, absolutely. So we want a starting wage of $20 an hour, which is pretty good from 15. And we want pay based on the amount of jobs that you know. So if you go and learn a new job, you get paid an extra 25 cents an hour because you know how to do that job now. You're adding value to the company. And that is also good for the company because it provides an incentive for you to learn new jobs.
Exactly. Their labor pool is more effective.
Absolutely. And we want cost of living adjustments as soon as inflation happens, as soon as costs start going up. We want that to be the metric. We want a committee at our workplace that analyzes the prices that are going up and makes those demands from Amazon. A proportionate cost of living raise. A lot of the things that are not factored into official cost of living is groceries, is those items that are not counted in the what's that federal statistic called? The one you look at, consumer price index.
Oh, CPI.
And
yeah.
And the producer price index. So, we want a real price index that the company has to measure, being accountable for our well-being, right? We want safety standards. We want Amazon. We want that representation in the grievance process where we can go and seek and go on strike and perform shop floor actions and go to the government if Amazon is subjecting us to horrible standards. And, of course, we want that equality between different levels of employment. But we also want the people who do move up, so, like learning ambassadors. You've heard of that role?
Mm-mm.
Learning ambassadors are responsible for learning new jobs and training new employees, and also mentoring those employees. So, learning ambassadors have high expectations for them, but they do not get paid a single dollar more. So, we want a separate tier system for them. So, they would go up to a tier 2, which is under a tier 3, which would be sort of the supervisors, right? So, those ambassadors, those essential roles, they would be paid an extra $2 on the hour. And they would also be compensated for learning new jobs, right? That's also a demand that the Amazon Labor Union has at JFK 8. And to preface this, to add more detail, more context, our facility, we got involved with Amazon Labor Union at the end of June and early July. That is when we actually became in contact with Chris Smalls, the executive committee, and we took a vote to leave the machinists in favor of independence. Because these AFL-CIO unions are very bureaucratic, and they always keep unions from becoming too radical. They suppress the work.
Yeah, I was part of what I was learning in my research about like the history of Labor Day was that basically out of the birth of Labor Day and suppression of International Workers' Day was like a corporate unionship, essentially. It was just like they exist, but they really serve to feed that narrative that you even brought up earlier, the capitalist narrative that like they aren't really helpful or necessary because of exactly what you're talking about. Like there's so much bureaucracy, not enough freedom of the workers to be able to decide what type of action is in their best interest and when, and to be able to act on those things.
And, for the Teamsters and all of the criticism that they get, they are aggressive in campaigning. They are. They will meet with your workers, and their whole goal is to inoculate the workers. Like, they have tried and true strategies to organize. And they have tried and true strategies to make sure that your demands are going to get met. That you're organized around your common demands, and that the organizing takes place internally, because that is what wins elections. That is what gets the workers what they want. So the Teamsters are way better by a long shot and way more radical than the AFL-CIO unions. And, they have their own coalition, the Strategic Organizing Center. They have the United Farm Workers, Communication Workers of America, and the SEIU, all together in their little coalition. Which, it's not a little coalition, there's millions of people there. So... And the Teamsters have cleaned up so much since the Democratic Union. Teamsters for a Democratic Union has gotten Sean O'Brien and other officers leading the way. They got rid of the Hoffas. They got rid of a lot of the mob influence that happened earlier. And so, yeah, there's still old guard that exist in some locals that are not too effective, but there's people like our local Teamsters. They just unionize Cisco drivers.
Hell yeah.
They're working on DHL. They're working on all kinds of other places, and they're even giving solidarity support to organizers. And they are heavily beefing up their program to organize Amazon workers. I've been a part of those trainings where I will meet with the Teamsters and tell them what they can do to best organize Amazon workers. And they listen to that, and they incorporate that into their training before they kickstart this program. And so, obviously I'm working with Amazon Labor Union, but Amazon Labor Union and the Teamsters, they are allies in this struggle. They are. And it's a great ally to have. But more importantly, in the big picture scope of things, we need to keep politicians from hijacking workers' campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
Like look at Amazon, AOC, the Squad, Bernie Sanders. They showed up to Staten Island when a victory was a for sure thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then Democrats keep trying to hijack this for their midterms. And we have to not allow them to make it political because this is the class struggle.
Mm-hmm.
I have to organize a very conservative area.
Same
And
here.
I get these people to see the class issue.
And the thing is, too, with the class struggle, it's like it doesn't matter if they are a Democrat or a Republican. They are on team oligarch, and we are not on that team. So we like it doesn't. If they try to co-opt our movement, it's to serve the oligarchs. It's to serve the ruling class, even if they try to paint it pretty and like yada yada. Like that is still their intention. And so any kind of co-opting that they do is ultimately dangerous to the class struggle 100%.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, you're already aware that liberals are closer to fascists than they are to leftists. And so
Oh yeah.
keeping them away from all of our stuff. I mean, even keeping, the DSA has been very helpful to workers, but I mean, social democrats, they betrayed the revolution a long time ago
Mm-hmm.
when they killed Rosa Luxemburg by snitching on her to the Freikorps in Germany at that time. And we have to keep a constant eye out for them, but we need a united left around the purpose of organizing workers.
Yep.
Like, I mean, leftists came together many times, no matter their ideologies, to fight fascism. And the class struggle is fighting fascism. Organizing
Mm-hmm.
work, it is fighting fascism.
And it
And
really
so,
brings people together across all of the other like single issue fights that they have, like whether the fight is healthcare or whether the fight is education or whether the fight is women's rights, like class is at the root of all of those things. And so it can really encompass and bring people together if we can help expose that.
yeah, and I mean, it's very sad that the United States is the way it is. Let's say you're working in Germany and you work for a non-union employer, which is pretty rare, pretty rare. But if you're working for a non-union employer in Germany, you still have a pretty damn good life because of all the social benefits, right? But over here, we have to fight and demand all this stuff from our employers and the politicians at the same time. It
Yep.
is one struggle because they are one class and we are one class. They are the bourgeoisie
Yes,
and we are the workers. We are the proletarian.
exactly. For those who might be listening and want to support the fruition of all of this hard work in Campbellsville to unionize the workers, but also in other areas, like maybe they have an Amazon center, distribution center, or something like in their hometown. What is the best way for us to support the workers in this effort and contribute to the revolution?
What I would say is start practicing organizing now and develop your praxis. You need you need to start reaching out to Amazon workers. You need to start reaching out to the workers at that workplaces, no matter where you can find them. Right? So if you can find them online and actually get their attention and not like show up in their DMs like a creep, but if you can get in the same social spaces as those people, you have an opportunity to talk to those workers. And you have to build a tremendous amount of rapport with people before you can change their worldview in any type of way. You have to empathize, you have to relate, you have to figure out what their common issues are, and then you have a chance at organizing, right? And so the next important thing after you make this connection is to formalize that connection by establishing a mutual aid network.
Mm-hmm. That's an important part that gets so overlooked.
No, mutual aid is the most important thing.
Exactly.
Especially if you're doing external organizing. Because if you're just going to go out there and hand employees flyers at the beginning of their shift or at the end of their shift when they're getting off and they're exhausted, they're just going to throw that shit away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just one more thing to take up brain space.
And yeah, they're just going to throw that away. But if you provide them food, water, refreshments, you break bread with them, you start carpooling with them, you offer to babysit their kids or something like that, or you talk about issues they care about with them, and you develop and foster a relationship and an emotional connection with them, and you alter their material conditions in a positive way, then that is when you have a chance at organizing. Food Not Bombs is a great case study for this because there are these anarchists that go out there and they stand up against the city government that doesn't want them to feed the homeless, doesn't want them to provide for the impoverished, and they do. Mm-hmm. And they get the message out there. And they make people realize the importance of mutual aid and that leftists and anarchists are on their side. And that's how it has to do. That's how Chris Smalls won. That's how the Amazon Labor Union won. They provided for the workers. They were grilling out and giving them food every day.
And you have to, if you're asking folks to step away from their only means of survival under capitalism, you have to create an alternative means of survival under capitalism.
Oh, absolutely. And you have to, like what Heather Goodall did up there, they have a retaliation fund. And they're trying to grow it to be big enough to where they can give it to anybody who loses their job in the process of organizing, right? So they can be there for them. You see the strike pantry that the coal miners have that are striking. Mm-hmm. You see all of the mutual aid that comes about, the strike funds, all of this. And it is essential. It has to be this way or it is not going to happen at all.
Yeah. And especially in areas like we're going to get to the point where our history is going to repeat itself with like the company towns where they're going to be able to govern and where they already have authority to evict people who are fired, because then retaliation against strikers or union organizers becomes not just fear of losing their job, but losing their housing, losing their security. And like, if we don't, in coal town history, they had to erect entire strike villages, essentially, where it's like they would just build these like pop-up shelters for the strikers because they were going to lose their housing because they lived in company towns. And these are the things, sometimes I get real irritated at the like broad call for a general strike. It's usually coming from like someone who's never organized before. And I'm just like, okay, yeah, let's do a general strike. But like, where's the funding coming from? Like, what about all the people who have kids? How are they going to keep them fed? Like, how do we care for the community that is going to be most vulnerable to the consequences of a general strike?
Absolutely. And that relates to what we're doing here in Campbellsville. As I said, it is an aging fulfillment center, very old. It is not as important to their operations as it used to be. Nowadays, we do mostly returns. Items. Here's the thing for all of you Amazon shoppers that are listening. If you buy clothing on Amazon and look at the barcode that you get when you get it, if it has LPN and then some numbers after it, it has been used and returned and then sent to you, and you thought you were buying something that was brand new. No, it was used. Somebody wore it. Somebody ragged it out a little bit. And it could have been through the Amazon Try Before You Buy program, which lets you keep it for 7 days. And then if you're a Prime member, you get to keep that article of clothing for 7 days, and then if you return it, you get a full refund. Like, it doesn't even come out of your card within those 7 days. And you can just go ahead and start a return and then return it. It'll go to SDF1 and then it'll go to you. You're going to get somebody's used clothing that they might not have even washed. And because of the nature of these overstuffed bins, the overhead bins are also overstuffed. And the sellers do not put that in good packaging most of the time. It's usually in the cheapest packaging. Sometimes the zipper is broken, all that other stuff. And so it'll fall out of its packaging onto the floor. Like the actual clothing itself. And so you're going to get dirty clothing that has been dropped on the floor and worn by somebody else, and you're going to pay full price for that. It is dirty.
It's like the consumer and the workers are losing.
Oh, absolutely. And so as a worker, you're incentivized to go and get a Prime membership because, you get free shipping, but you also get to use that employee discount that you can only use on Amazon. Right? And then you're incentivized to go and get the Amazon Prime credit card because you're shopping on Amazon and you get an extra 5% off or whatever.
So you've got the company medical center, you've got the company housing, you've got the company store, you're borderline getting paid in script as soon as you take out the Amazon Prime credit card.
Oh yeah, and if you ever want like a reward at Amazon, they have something called swag bucks. So they'll give you these swag bucks at some locations, and then you can trade that in for like an Amazon shirt or hat or something.
So you can be advertising for Amazon.
Yeah. Essentially, yes. And Amazon even has a healthcare program. It's called Amazon Care. And it started out as a project with Warren Buffett, his Berkshire Hathaway company, and JP Morgan. It was called Haven Healthcare in the beginning. That deal fell through, and then Amazon made it into a telehealth service. But as an employee, to access this telehealth service, you have to log into your consumer account and then link your health insurance to it. That's what I said about the digital bill of rights. Your consumer spending is linked to your Amazon employee spending. And you also have the option to link one of your cards from your Amazon shopping account to your health insurance account to cover whatever your insurance does not meet.
So many conflicts of interest and ethical violations here. So many.
Oh, absolutely. And all the while you don't know exactly what Amazon is stealing from you. So look at the Warehouse Worker Protection Act. There was a version passed in California. The Amazon Labor Union had a hand in drafting this legislation in New York and trying to get the governor to sign it. Whereas it's already been ratified through their Senate and their House in New York. But what it does is it makes Amazon have to set a quota that is realistic and attainable. Basically, Amazon employees, your quota will change as a picker based on whether it is customer orders or if it's going to a different warehouse. So it can change within a matter of seconds. So you pick a customer order item, and then it will tell you that now you have to pick transship, which is going to a different fulfillment center, right? And so you are not aware of that It is not transparent. You do not know what your productivity goal is unless you're close to management. And even if you do know, you have to constantly watch your ass because the moment it changes, you have to start working faster. And what the Warehouse Worker Protection Act does is it makes them consolidate all of those different roles into one productivity goal that they have to make you aware of at all times. Not your average productivity goals, because Amazon doesn't measure your productivity by averages. You get to only see your average, what they consolidate, but yet your goal is not consolidated in most of the states.
I am pulling this up. I'm going to link this article about the Warehouse Worker Protection Act in the show notes. It's from the Teamster website. And so you just got fired a couple of weeks ago. Is there a fund for you where folks could support you?
Oh, absolutely. I have a retaliation fund. Now I'm calling it my survival fund because I haven't yet received any type of unemployment payments. I have been denied my job back because Amazon gives you the chance to appeal a termination where sort of they pull 3 associates and then they pull 2 managers to review your case and decide whether you deserve your job back or not. And they upheld the termination after my appeal. So, Amazon also continues the retaliation like they could try and block my unemployment payments.
Mm-hmm.
They could dispute my claim, which they have done to many former workers that they have let go. It's bad. And then you have to go to an unemployment insurance lawyer or whatever and try to appeal their blockage of that. All the meanwhile, you're waiting on the labor board for months to try and get an injunction, try and get your job back. So yeah, I'll definitely send you the funds. It's through a platform called Zephy, which collects 0% in fees from the donors and 0% in fees from the person receiving the donations.
Oh, awesome. Great.
And that's because we set up a public charity before we even started collecting any kind of donations. And that's a good thing because it adds transparency and accountability to our fundraising.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That would be great. If you send that to me, I'll include it in the show notes. And before we wrap, is there any last parting words you want to share or anything that you wanted to say that you haven't gotten to say yet?
So Amazon is very dystopian. It's important that we empower Amazon workers to organize. If you can, one of the most effective things you can do is obviously to get a job at Amazon. Partner with an organization like Emergency Workplace Organizing Center. That is a collaborative effort with unions. It's even sponsored by the IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. And they have free organizer trainings. The IWW has organizer trainings. Socialist Alternative. I'm a member of Socialist Alternative. They have organizer trainings. The DSA is very helpful in that. If you can find a good chapter, like Bread and Roses, they're a Marxist caucus within the DSA, so not really social democrats. So I got so much training. I'm a member of the IWW as well. So because I'm a big fan of dual power structures, so let's say we unionized with the Amazon labor union and then it turned out, if it turned out to be like a federated system where you don't have too much power in your local, then you can decertify them and start being very militant instead. I believe wholeheartedly in those dual power structures. We're definitely going to keep our public charity, and we're also going to use it to expand our organizing into other warehouses and to even general campaigns around here who want to organize. And so, yeah, you have to always analyze the big picture perspective. Even Party for Socialism and Liberation, they also are very interested in organizing workers right now. I don't think they're as effective as Socialist Alternative at the moment, because but the CPUSA, the RevComs, organizations like that, you need to stay away from them because they don't have any interest in organizing workers. But we had sort of a case study. JFK8 had people from everywhere coming to organize. One of the reasons I joined the Socialist Alternative is because of another Amazon employee who's been receiving help from them and who had got me in touch with them, and they started helping us. And I really like their philosophy. I really like their goals, the literature and stuff they publish. And I joined as a college student, which I recently lost my college because I lost that benefit from Amazon, the tuition benefit. And but the case study at JFK8 is you had people from these socialist workers organizations taking jobs at Amazon to organize, which is called salting the workplace. And they were from everywhere. Like Justine Medina, she was from the Young Communist League. You had people from Socialist Alternative, people from PSL, absolutely everywhere cooperating to organize. And so that's one of the most effective thing is because SALTs, they're people that come there explicitly to organize, and they have nothing to lose.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas at SDF1, because of the Aging Fulfillment Center, and because they used to have meetings in the past where the management would tell these employees, we are evaluating the efficacy of our ability to keep the doors open at this warehouse in the near future. So people are afraid to lose their jobs here. Very afraid. And it is a very valid thing.
Mm-hmm.
Up at JFK8, it was built in 2017. They have robotics. So that's a big investment. Amazon needs to get their money back. And they need to keep the customers in New York. They have to be as close to the customer as possible, right? Or else they lose their Prime members when they can't guarantee that shipping speed. And then that will cause them to lose Prime credit card holders. And that will cause them to lose all of this stuff. And so you have to look at the specific material conditions of those workers. You cannot paint with a broad brush.
Yep, 100%. I think that is a great way to wrap us up because it's also a thread that I pull on all the time. I've been a community organizer for a decade now, and I know I also am deeply embedded in a conservative, highly read area, and I've seen how effective community organizing and worker organizing can be. So if you're listening to this and you have access to resources, financial support that you can contribute, please go send some funds to the Survival Fund, the Retaliation Fund, and then go learn to organize and start organizing your own coworkers, regardless of whether you work at Amazon or somewhere else, or if you can go to work at Amazon. I think the more workplaces that we have organizing and joining in on this rolling snowball, then the closer we get to the avalanche that we really need.
And it is nonpartisan, as I said. It is a class issue. So
exactly.
Whatever the best union in your area is, that is who you should organize with because they have the most resources. Independent unions like the ALU are very hard to build up from the ground up. But if you go with a more established union, you will have an easier time of doing it. And the facts remain the same, is that the union is 100% on the inside. That is the workplace and the coworkers. And they just receive support from the union at large, like legal, some benefits and the grievance process. That's the support they receive from the inside, from the union and their structure. Otherwise, all they do is everything on the inside. And I cannot preface it enough that if we make it about moral purity, that is not what praxis is.
Exactly.
So Westerners, the reason the left hasn't been effective here is because they're worried about being pure. You are not an effective organizer if you wanna do anarcho-syndicalism and you're in an area where people are conservative, right? That is not effective at all. Those people don't necessarily care what union they get as long as they feel autonomous, right? And geez, it's I'm so long-winded sometimes, but
no, we'll have to have you back for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And so one more clarification at the end.
Yes.
I don't want to give anybody the impression that we've already had our election. We're still organizing towards the election.
Yeah.
So that means like we're still getting our card signed because we believe that because it's a tried and true tactic, we want to make sure we get a simple majority before we even file for election.
Yep.
Because, Amazon Labor Union got lucky. They got really lucky that they filed with 30% and won. Because that did not work at the fulfillment center across the street. Partly because those employees, they were not well inoculated against management's intimidation.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, so every bit of support helps us with our campaign in Campbellsville, and it helps with the other Kentucky warehouses that are building up organizing committees as we speak.
Yes. And workers need everyone to be on their side so that we can build this.
Absolutely. And, another thing of it is we need to organize the people that Amazon works with. So UPS is already a union shop. If we get DHL, that's another Amazon partner. If we get FedEx, there's another Amazon partner. The Postal Service is already unionized. So get those delivery drivers, the last mile delivery contractors, get them unionized. Get the sellers, get them unionized. And then you start putting pressure on Amazon that way as well.
Yep. It's got to be that robust approach. Pull all of the pillars out from the foundation. That wraps up this special bonus episode of Rednecks Rising. Please do not forget to check out Matt's Retaliation Fund in the show notes. You can contribute, you can share in whatever ways you have the means and access to do so. I will also drop the link to many of the organizing resources that Matt referenced during the episode. So please check those out, find one close to you, and get busy organizing, y'all. And before we go, we have to know the answer to today's trivia question, which, in case you forgot, was about which state the Appalachian Trail begins in on the northern side of the trail. So, Chris, what's the answer?
So the answer to our trivia question this week is Maine. More than 3,000 people each year try to hike the entire thing, and less than a quarter of those actually make it.
Dang. May the odds be ever in their favor, right? Well, Lord willing and the creek don't rise, y'all, we will see you tomorrow for our regularly scheduled episode of Rednecks Rising Podcast. Till then, y'all take care.